I'd like to start with a question. If there was a theory that could explain 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, plus it could make accurate predictions, would that theory be worthy of study or not? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs up it is. Okay, good. Well, before I dive into that, I'd just like to thank you for what you do here. How you give up your time and your talent and your treasure to help make this a better place to live. It's very commendable and I appreciate it. And I'm trying to do a similar thing on a spiritual level. I've got a ministry called Solidify Your Faith, where I help people solidify their faith in the Bible by looking at science. Because there's so much evidence that points to a creator and a worldwide flood, but it's being censored or misinterpreted. And the results are devastating as we look at our society becoming more and more godless, more and more lawless. And so what I'm trying to do is to slow down this trend by giving creation talks from here to Florida. And I've given as many as possible at churches, schools, camps, even colleges. And some of these talks show up on my YouTube channel. You know, I've helped college kids start Bible clubs and a creation science club on campus. And I've donated resources to a state library, state college library, and they've been very popular. They're hardly ever on the shelf. So there's a demand for this. And now my goal is to help people start a creation club in every community so people can have an opportunity to think. See, to think about something, you need to see both sides of an issue. But unfortunately, in our government schools, media, and museums, they only allow one perspective when it comes to the origin of the universe and the origin of man. And that's godless materialism for the Big Bang and evolution, which is absurd. I mean, when's the last time you popped the hood on your car, looked at your engine, and thought, well, I wonder how many millions of years it took for that thing to evolve? It's just absurd. I mean, the dead giveaway for intelligent design, pretty much anything who has this, anything that has this intelligently designed, look for multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. That's dead giveaway, intelligent design. Well, guess what, folks? Multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. And if you could see inside your cells, it would blow your mind how many multiple parts are working together. And so it's clearly we're designed. And yet, that idea is not tolerated in our government schools or science journals. So with that in mind, I submit to you the Hydroplate Theory. It was developed by Dr. Walt Brown. He was an Army Ranger, got his PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering. He ran the Benet military lab that had hundreds of scientists and dozens of PhDs, and he was the top dog. So he was a brilliant man with brilliant friends. And he's driving through South Dakota in the 1970s, and he hears on the radio that somebody found Noah's Ark on a mountain. He thought, an ark on a mountain? Yeah. Well, if that was true, that would mean everything under that ark was underwater. And that would mean there was a worldwide flood. And that would mean that there was a bunch of plants and animals buried in mud that turned into fossils. He thought, wait a minute, if fossils are evidence for a flood, where's the evidence for evolution? And he began to study it and ask his brilliant colleagues, what evidence is there for evolution? And after 2 years, he didn't have any. And he became a creationist. And he developed this Hydroplate theory. See, now most theories, they start with what we have and try and figure out how we got it. We look at the effects, which are known, and try and figure out the cause, which are unknown. Well, this is different. He sets up the cause with only one assumption, and then he lets the laws of physics go at it and determine the effects. And those effects match perfectly with what we see in the universe and in the world. And his one assumption is half of the ocean was inside the earth in a layer of water 60 miles down. So just think of the world as a big apple, and the skin is 60 miles thick, made of granite. There's a layer of water, roughly a mile thick, and underneath that is basalt. And the granite and the basalt are touching each other at certain places of the world. Okay? So that's his one assumption. And I talked to a professor, and the professor said, if that assumption is right, everything else flows. Everything I'm going to tell you is valid if the assumption is right. She just didn't believe the assumption. So anyhow, now let's let the laws of physics go at this thing. Okay, so the moon tugs on the earth, and it causes tides, high tide and low tide, twice a day. It also tugs on the mantle, but back then the mantle wasn't broken into plates. The crust, it tugs on the crust, and the crust wasn't broken into plates back then. It was just one solid crust. And so it got stretched and compressed, stretched and compressed, stretched and compressed, and that generated heat. Like if I had a wire and I bend it back and forth, it gets hot. So the crust gets hot, the heat goes into the water, water gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. It wants to boil, but it can't because there's no room to boil. And at 705 degrees Fahrenheit, at 3,200 psi, pounds per square inch, it becomes supercritical water, where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. And it starts to dissolve the granite above and the basalt beneath, and it makes these minerals that turn into limestone and salts and quartz, which is a cementing agent. Okay, so the water's getting hotter and hotter, the crust is getting weaker and weaker, and the pressure's building and building, and now it's up to 372,000 psi. It's like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. And when something has to give, so when the crust finally cracked and the water got up to the atmospheric zero, which is almost it got up to the surface, which is almost zero pressure, it just explodes with tremendous power. And the crack on the Earth spreads in 2 directions at 3 miles per second, so in 2 hours it circumnavigates the globe. And Walt Brown says it came up with such force during this process, it's like 300 trillion hydrogen bombs going on. You think, wait a minute, Brian, if that happened, wouldn't that leave a mark on the Earth? And the answer is yes, and it did. It's called the Mid-Oceanic Ridge. It's this blue line. It's a 46,000 mile mountain range that circumnavigates the globe at the bottom of every ocean. And it's a really weird mountain range because it's got a lot of tension cracks. There's straight cracks going this way and this way. So how do you make a mountain that by stretching it in 2 different directions? That's a puzzle. Another puzzle is, where did all the sediment on the continents, average as a mile thick on the continents, where did that sediment come from? And why did it turn into sedimentary rock? Well, where did it come from? It came from where the crack was. Because once the Earth cracked, the crust cracked, now you got 2 60-mile cliffs. Okay, and on Earth you can only have a cliff 5 miles high before the weight of the rock crushes the weight below. So these 60-mile cliffs are crumbling into this flow of water. We'll call it the fountains of the great deep that is shooting it up. And it's bringing up the basalt and the granite and the limestone. And it's depositing it on the continents. Okay, why did it turn into stone, sedimentary rock? Well, remember quartz? That's a cementing agent. Mystery solved. Okay, so now you got this crust, the water going up, these cliffs crumbling down, the crack is getting wider and wider and wider, and eventually there's nothing pushing down on the mantle. And so the mantle bulges, and it stretches the basalt, hence you got the tension cracks. And it bulges, and now the continents are a little bit higher, and they start sliding. Like if you had a couple of freight trains on railroad tracks, and you raise one end of the track, it starts sliding. And so now there's even less weight, so it bulges even more. Keeps sliding, it bulges even more. Its average is 800 miles wide on that ridge. That's compared to St. Louis, plus another 150 miles. So the continents start sliding. You got North America and South America sliding to the west. You've got Europe and Africa sliding to the east, and they keep sliding until they hit resistance, where they run out of water or hit another plate, but one end of it stops, but the other keeps going, and it just buckles up, forming the mountains. That's why the major mountain ranges are parallel to the Mid-Oceanic Ridge. Major mountain ranges are the green lines. Okay? And so now the mountains rise up. You got a big mass on a small base, so they sink in. Well, if something's sinking in, something's got to rise up. That's how the plateau is formed next to the mountains. And also, similarly, where the mantle rose up, it rose up 46,000 miles around the Earth. It rose up. Well, something's got to sink in. What sunk in? The Pacific Ocean. This ring of fire where all this lava is, where the granite melted because of the extreme pressure, sunk in. The whole continent sunk in, called Zealandia, down by New Zealand. The Mariana Trench sunk in. It's the deepest place on Earth, 36,000 feet. So what happened? The Pacific Ocean got lower, and the water that was covering the Earth starts to run into the oceans now to fill that up. And that cut the canyons, not the Grand Canyon. That's a whole different talk. But the canyons in the continental shelf. And most rivers have a canyon in the shelf that's underwater. And it can't cut it underwater. So that tells us the continents were higher when the water was rushing off and cutting the canyons. And then the continents sunk down and the oceans rose up and buried those canyons on the continental shelf. And Greenland has a huge canyon under 2 kilometers of ice. How do you cut a canyon under ice? Okay, that's the Ice Age. The water gushed off, it cut the canyon, and then the Ice Age filled it up. Now, an Ice Age is counterintuitive because you need warmer winters and cooler summers. You need warmer winters so you get more moisture in the air coming down as snow on the continents. And yet you need cooler summers so the snow doesn't melt. Well, how's that going to happen? Well, after the flood, the oceans were warmer. And it's warmer air, more precipitation. Well, how do you get cooler summers? The continents were higher elevations, cooler temps. Plus, with this ring of fire and all this volcanic activity, there's a lot more aerosols in the atmosphere blocking the sun from the heat from getting to the surface of the earth. And so then you get it snowed more than it melted year after year after year. That's just what an ice age is. And 500 years of snowing more than it melts, you got glaciers everywhere. Except the plains of Alaska and parts of Siberia, which have permafrost today. That's just a big mind bender. How does that happen? I cover that in another talk. So anyhow, then what's happening? The oceans are cooling off, so there's going to be less precip after that, and also the continents sink down, the atmosphere clears up, so then it melts the glaciers. And to a certain extent, we're still recovering from the glacier, from the ice age. And I give a talk on climate change, and the big inconvenient fact that they never talk about is carbon dioxide is plant food. The more CO2 we have in our atmosphere, the more food we're going to get, and the less droughts we're going to have. But anyhow, Inconvenient Facts by Gregory Wrightstone is a real good source for that. But back to the flood. Down in Antarctica, they find evidence that alligators, dinosaurs, and palm trees live down there. Even if it's warmer, how does a palm tree grow where it's dark 4 months of the year? And on the North Pole, in Axel Island, they find redwood tree stumps. That's not going to grow where it's 12 months of the year, or dark 4 months of the year. Plus, they find mammoths, probably millions of them up there. Now, mammoths are not Arctic animals. There's not enough food for them. There's not enough water for them. They're temperate animals. And one of the mammoths that they found up there was frozen standing upright. They have it in a museum in Russia. It was frozen alive, had to be frozen alive, and flash frozen because he still had identifiable food in his stomach. You know, you hunters, the first thing you got to do is get gutted. Otherwise, it's going to destroy the meat. Well, this flash froze it. It didn't even destroy what was in the stomach. So how do you flash freeze a mammoth? Well, Walt Brown says that, the fountains of the great were shooting up the mud and the water and stuff with such force that it got outside our atmosphere. And it cooled off in outer space. But it didn't escape our gravitational pull, so it came back down and buried the mammoths, froze them. So you freeze a temperate animal in a temperate climate, how come it doesn't thaw out? Well, that brings us to the big roll. Because most of the mountains on the north are canceled out by mountains on the south, except for the Himalayas. And you want to find the Himalayas, you find this 90 East Ridge, which is a 3,000-mile crack in the crust that's almost perfectly straight north, pointing at the Himalayas. Okay, so how does that happen? Well, there's a bulge at the equator, and when the Earth shifted, that bulge ripped the crust. So why did it shift? It's because the Himalayas were farther north. Like if we had a spinning top and you drop some glue on it, that glue is going to want to go to the outside, and it's going to take the top with it. That's what the Himalayans did. They were up more towards the North Pole, and the mammoths living in Mammothville with all the food and water shifted up. As this shifted down, Mammothville shifted up to Mammoth Chill, where they never thawed out. And tropical palm trees shifted down to the Antarctica. Okay? So it's an interesting theory. Can we validate it? Yes, with predictions. Okay? Walt Brown says some of that water and mud and stuff was shooting up at 7 miles per second. So not only did it escape our atmosphere, it escaped our gravitational pull and kept on going. And so there's a lot of water, and the bigger things will attract the littler things. So you get this stuff like dirty snowballs flying around up there. What has been described as a dirty snowball? Anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess? Comets. Comets are dirty snowballs. So Walt Brown said when we find out what's in a comet, we're going to find stuff from the Earth like olivine. And he was right. The Stardust mission proved that. And they found stuff that can only form in liquid water out in the comets. Well, the Earth is in the Goldilocks zone. This is the only place there's liquid water in the solar system. Okay, and he also predicted that when we find what asteroids are, we're going to find that they're floating rock piles made of rounded boulders. And he was right. How do you get rounded boulders in outer space? Because if things slam into each other, there's going to be sharp edges. The only way you get rounded boulders is if they're going through a fast flow of water before they get breaking off the edges before they get shot into outer space. Okay, so if this did happen, if things are shooting up with such force, wouldn't something hit the moon? The answer is yeah, and it did. The near side of the moon, there's only one side that faces the Earth. The near side of the moon has been pounded, like it's been shot with buckshot. This side is a lot more fragile than the other side. It's got more moonquakes and it's got more lava flows. Okay, so this is the theory that explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system. We all gave it a thumbs up at the beginning, but I don't know of a single school or science journal that promotes it, or teaches it, or draws it in and it's the censorship just bothers me like crazy. Because Walt Brown should get the credit he deserves before he dies. And there's also eternities in stake. You know, if you don't believe in God the Creator, you probably aren't going to believe in God's Son to die for your sins. And so I encourage people to check this out. You can see this online. Check out Walt Brown's own website. It's called creationscience.com. And he's got a video explaining it. And he's also, you can look at this book online for free. This is the 8th edition. I'm sharing the 9th edition with you. The 9th edition can be found at rsr.org and search 9th edition. So then you can see that for free also. And also you can look in the Bible, because this one assumption has scriptural basis to it. The fountains of the great deep, storehouses of water. And I go through that in my talk. I give a talk called Noah, What Caused the Flood? I gave that at St. Cloud State and at Northwestern, where that's my attempt to tie this all together. And so also I talked to that professor. She said, this model works if the assumption is true. And we talked about it, it's like, well, she said, you just can't have faith in that. Well, do you have faith that everything came from nothing? That's faith-based position too. That I don't have enough faith to believe that hydrogen and helium from the Big Bang turned into people. So what we have here, it's not science versus religion. It's science built on one view of history that acknowledges God versus science built on another view of history that doesn't acknowledge God. My challenge is, what bothers me is they only teach one of those faiths in school. It's either teach what we can observe, which was her position. It's like, well, can we see, test, demonstrate? Well, yeah, let's teach that in science. Okay, but you can't do that with the Big Bang. You can't do that with the evolution of people. And so, anyhow, all the censorship just frustrates me. And so I was so excited when I got this newsletter from Creation Research Society, summer of 2020. They have an article on flood models. And they mentioned the hydroplate theory. And they gave it a fair write-up. And I was so excited. Because that's telling me, you know what that means? It's the dam of censorship is cracking. So there's more truth flowing through. And it's our job to chip away at that crack so more truth can go through it. And that's how I think we change society, from the bottom up. We let society have an opportunity to think, and I believe the truth will prevail. Because America's at a crossroads. It's a tipping point. Are we going to return to the biblical principles that allows God to bless us? Or are we going to continue to do what the government schools say? God doesn't exist. We're mutated animals. Which path are we going to take? And so beliefs have consequences. And I believe people should have an opportunity to think and see both sides. John Adams warned us about this. He said, our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So what we have is information. The truth is there. We can spread the truth. And I just encourage people to get informed and inform others. There's a great website. I just encourage you to take 15 minutes and go into scienceuprising.com. There's just a handful of videos and look at the origin of life and the origin of DNA. I was showing these at our creation club at the public library. Guy came in and with his friend, and he asked what I was doing. It's like, well, we're showing creation stuff. And then he went and he got his friend, and I showed him those 2 videos. And when he got up, he goes, if that's true, that raises some interesting questions. It certainly does. Because what you're going to see are PhD scientists exposing the holes in evolution. And so I believe beliefs have consequences. America's at a tipping point. It's time for us to start saying, hey, the Bible's valid. It's not just for Sundays. This is for every area. So with that, do we have any questions? It's a sip out of a microphone, right? It's a sip out of a fire hydrant. I understand that.
So, how long when did his book first come out?
This is the 8th edition. This is 2008. It's been out a long time, and he keeps revising it. And my perspective is, if the creation movement would have been found in this drum in the last 30 years, we'd have so much scientific credibility, because we just touched on 2 of the confirmed predictions, he's got about 6 of them.
How we doing?
You know, if every 5 years, if we would have had this and say, because what they did, they were making predictions what they'd find in a comet. You know, Dr. Brownlee, he was predicting stuff from the outer solar system, because that's where the Oort cloud supposedly is. And while Brown is saying, no, it's from Earth. And when they found out, it's like, okay, chalk one up for creationists, chalk another one up for creationists, and see how well they're doing with their predictions, because their model doesn't predict very well, if at all.